What got you there with What got you there with Sean Delaney?
Hey, I'm Sean Delaney, and on this episode of What Got You There, I sit down with former Navy SEAL Rich Diviney, and author of the new book, The Attributes, to talk about stress, challenge, and overcoming uncertainty. If that's something you're into and want to know how to be adaptable and handle life, then you're going to love this episode. Rich, welcome to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
Good, Sean. Thanks for having me. Doing great.
Very well to hear. One thing I thought would be fun to start with is, are there certain non-negotiables that you have every day or have had through most of your adult life?
Wow, that's a great question. I wish there were more. Let me start with that. you know, the very basic, the non-negotiable for me when it comes to family first is I hug and kiss my wife and I hug and kiss my kids. That's non-negotiable every day, and they're used to that, right? So I think that from a personal level, I think from a kind of health level, I try to do something that gets my pulse rate up every day if I can. And I should say pulse rate, not necessarily pulse rate up, but certainly, elevated. And then I try to get outside at least once every day. In fact, I think I'm designed to be outside because I can't go a day just in the house, even if it's, really bad weather. I have to get out and breathe the air and feel the rain or the wind or whatever. So the list is short, but those are probably a couple of them.
Speaking around how you're designed, something I came across in the book that I thought was really interesting. You were talking about your high school athletic career in lacrosse, and that you didn't find yourself to be a competitive person. And so I would love to just dive deeper into this, because I have to assume both myself and a lot of the listeners think, all right, highly decorated Navy SEAL, you must have been psychotically competitive almost to thrive in that environment. So I would love to unpack this.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something I was, in fact, worried about. I kind of realized my non-competitive nature when I was playing sports, and I know you were a lacrosse player too, but I didn't really. We'd win or lose, and I didn't really care that much. I loved the game. I loved the precision of the game. I loved the teamwork, and so there were aspects of the I guess game and competition that I loved. But when it came to winning or losing, I wasn't emotionally moved either way. And so I said to myself, man, I just, what's going on? And it worried me, because I just like you say, and probably most assume, I said to myself, man, if I'm not competitive, how am I going to do this in the SEAL teams? Well, interestingly enough, when I got the SEAL teams, I realized that BUDS, basic underwater demolition / SEAL training, the where you go to become a Navy SEAL, favors neither the competitive nor the non-competitive person. And the proof in that is because, one of the proofs is that they hand out 2 awards at the end of BUDS. One award is the Honor Man. The Honor Man gets an award for the fastest run times, fastest swims, fastest O courses, right? That all adds up, and whoever has the highest scores gets the Honor Man award, right? That award favors the competitive person, the competitive spirit, right? But the other award they give is called the Fire in the Gut Award. The Fire in the Gut Award is given to the person, the student, who displayed throughout BUDS the most grit, the most fortitude, the most mental toughness, whatever that looked like. And oftentimes that recipient had some of the lowest scores, right? And really just nugged it out and grunted it out and just had a rough, everybody has a rough time in BUDS, but it's typically the person who seems to have the roughest time, right? And so the course, and so this is one of the things I loved about BUDS. And people say SEAL training, man, it must be tough, and it was, but one of the things I really, really loved about the training course was it was so binary and so pure. It didn't care who you were, didn't care where you came from, didn't care if you were an all-star athlete or a valedictorian. All it did was take a bunch of dudes and say, hey, we're going to throw you in this environment, and if you have what it takes, you have what it takes, right? And it takes you down to 0 or sub-zero, and sees if you have what it takes to get there. And so that kind of purity really, it's very, first of all, it's very binding in terms of your relationships, right? You form deep relationships with these other human beings because the environment is so pure and there's no bias whatsoever. It's just you, the dude next to you, or the dudes next to you in the environment. But the other thing it showed me was that the SEAL teams, and I think any high performing team, in fact, other than maybe an athletic team, favors both the competitive and the non-competitive spirit, because the competitive spirit is very powerful in the sense that someone who's competitive will look at a situation and start to immediately deconstruct what the boundaries are, what the rules are, what the game is, and then says, okay, how do we win, right? And that's really powerful. The non-competitive person will look at a situation or environment and say, okay, I understand what's going on here, but what's another way around this? What's another, I don't really feel like competing in that mess or that zone. So I'm going to think of a different way. Right. So, so in combat, it's kind of the equivalent of sometimes you have to run it straight up the line. Sometimes you have to run the ball straight up the line. That's what the environment requires. But sometimes you have to bend the rules, break the rules, sneak around, do something different than no one ever thought of. And that's where a person who doesn't necessarily think competitively comes in very advantageously. And so that's why it was really cool to have both polarities on the SEAL teams.
I love hearing the depth of this. I'd be really intrigued to dive a little bit deeper and understand how you approach then releasing your first book and book publishing. How do you approach that? Are you coming at that with that non-competitive mindset as well?
Yeah, well, well, the first way I approached it was I kind of eschewed the assumption that I was going to write a leadership book, because there's a lot of folks, and certainly a lot of guys I know, who are out there writing leadership books and in the leadership space, and they're all doing really, really good things. I mean, I would recommend all of them. But when I looked at that field, I said to myself, that field seems a bit crowded. And I think that if I were to go into that field, I'd probably be saying a lot of the same stuff that all these guys who are phenomenal are saying. And so why don't I just choose or look down another field? And my real deep passion is really human behavior. How do we do things? How do people do things like that are remarkable? And it really stemmed from myself. It's like I looked around after I made it through buds, and I was in the teams for a while. I kept on looking around and say to myself, how the heck did I get here? How am I surrounded by such all-star people? And what are those traits? What are those qualities that allow that to happen? And ironically, the guys around me, because they're just as humble, if not more so, were saying the same thing about themselves. It was kind of this idea. We all had this kind of tendency to try to throw ourselves into environments where we were surrounded by people we thought were better than us, so that it brought up our game. And so one of the ways I approached the book was, I said, I'm going to write a book that helps us understand and deconstruct this behavior. So it's going to be outside of this. I'll throw some, as you know, I threw some leadership stuff in there because leadership matters, and attributes do affect leadership. But then say, okay, then I want to write something that is much more of a long game type book, where someone can actually use it, they can reuse it, they can kind of keep it by their nightstand, and it can have some legs. And so that's kind of how I approached it. I guess I probably didn't think too much. Again, I want to say, sometimes being competitive, this is where attributes matter, right? Sometimes the environment requires competitiveness, right? So sometimes I have to force myself and say, hey, now is the time to compete, right? And then other times, it's just really more where you bias towards, right? So that's kind of how I approached the book, I guess, overall.
Yeah, I think one of the really helpful things with the book is a lot of these things are almost on a dimmer switch, right? All the attributes that you go or you uncover, and that a lot of us will have all of these, but to certain degrees, and it just depends. And I know we're going to dive a lot into those, but something you brought up a minute ago about doing the remarkable, and everyone's thinking, all right, there's so many people who love reading the Navy SEAL books, watching the shows on them. Very few people attempt to do that, then very few people are successful. When was that moment for you growing up where you were like, you know what, this is something I think I'd love to do?
Wow, I think so I learned about this. I grew up wanting to be a Navy pilot. I have a twin brother. My dad was a private pilot, so he'd take us flying on the weekends, which is another thing. And my dad wasn't really competitive. He didn't really watch sports, so we'd go flying on the weekends. And so what was interesting is we'd go to school on Monday, and all our friends would be talking about the football game, and we were like, "Well, we didn't see it. We were flying with my dad," So. but my brother and I wanted to be Navy pilots, and one of the reasons why we wanted to be Navy pilots was because we felt like, well, they're the only guys who land jets on boats, right? How hard is that? Let's do that. So there's obviously something in us that wanted to do that. And he ended up being a Marine Corps pilot and flying the Harrier, which is that's the VSTOL that goes up and down, right? So that's a real difficult plane to fly. So he had his own difficulty or challenge in that, but I learned about the SEALs after the first Gulf War, and I read an article in Newsweek, and it like outlined all the special operations forces in the military post this Gulf War in '91, and so Army Green Berets, Rangers, SEALs, Air Force PJs, etc. Um, and in that article they had, like, I don't know, 25 pictures or so of guys, spec ops guys, in different environments. So one underwater, one in the snow, one in free fall gear, one in the desert and jungle. And I realized that out of the 25 pictures, like 20 of them were Navy SEALs, just in different environments. And so I said to myself, man, that's really cool. Those guys go everywhere. So that was one thing. But the other thing was their kind of their waterborne nature. I mean, the SEALs were born from the water. I mean, the whole idea was they were born from the UDT, the underwater demolition team. So, and I was always a water rat. I loved the ocean. I loved swimming. I loved everything about it. So, so the idea that these guys, and the saying in the teams was, and it still is, the enemy will never be stupid enough or brave enough to follow you into the water. So when in doubt, go there, right? And so that the audacity of making a hostile environment your safe place, I thought was pretty cool. So I said to myself, let me try it, and just started marching down the road and got there and ended up where I was. So that was really the impetus of it. But you don't. I mean, especially in SEAL training, you never think of yourself as remarkable. I mean, maybe think of yourself the opposite in SEAL training because they're just kicking your butt so hard. So, so I think it's afterwards when you get through it, you say, "Wow, look at what I just did." And I think there's because of the humility of the process, because I know that there are exceptions, but most guys come out of that process with an increased humility. Because no one, you can be as badass as you want, but when you start thinking about war and combat, the bullet doesn't care who you are, doesn't care how big you are, doesn't care how fast you are, doesn't care how strong you are, right? Nor does the environment, right? The ocean will kill you if you're not if you're not careful. So there's so many things, there's so many aspects in the job that are so much more, I guess, badass and hostile than the human, that humility is almost a prerequisite for the job. So I don't think I would venture to guess that most, if not all, SEALs would not define themselves as remarkable. Just guys who figured out how to do things in gnarly environments and succeed.
That's really interesting. And we're going to come back to that line about thriving in kind of hostile environments, because I underlined that. I actually had it in my notes as one of my favorite sections. So we're going to dive deeper into that. But I would love to know, you're talking about this increased humility. And I'm wondering, because we always hear so much about buds, and that's the main part of the training. I'm wondering, what part of training do you think shaped you the most?
Gosh, I don't. So I don't know if I could nail down one thing. I felt like when I got to training, I immediately felt like I locked in to kind of the conduct of achieving the goal. And so the example is, I got to SEAL training, and I'd really never run on soft sand. Anybody who's run on soft sand will know soft sand running is tough, and it's tough on the ankles. It's tough to do. There's a lot of resistance. And so I got to SEAL training, and I first showed up, and I hadn't done a lot of running on soft sand. And so the first time we started running on soft sand, I was a mess, right? It was really hard. And so I said to myself, well, this is not going to work. And so I remember on the weekends, because you basically do gnarly training from Monday through Friday, and then you'd have Saturday and Sunday to kind of recover. On the weekends, I would put on my boots and I'd go running in the soft sand just to practice, just to figure out if there was a technique to try to do better. Same thing with the obstacle course, which I had really never experienced, and I'd go practice the obstacle course. And so what I realized about myself, I guess, in that process was that I was driven enough to to do what I had to do what it took to make it through. And so I guess learning about that in myself carried through, and certainly carried through my career. And then of course, once you're done and you realize, you look back and say, man, I just made it through Hell Week, or I just made it through this training. You say, okay, wait a second. I mean, if the SEAL trainee coming out of Buds can say that they have a preponderance of any one thing, it's confidence. It's coming out of Buds, because you don't really learn too much about the task of being a Navy SEAL in Buds. You learn some shooting, some basic demo, some diving, but a lot of the deep training of being a Navy SEAL happens after Buds. And so I think every guy though says, I know that regardless of circumstance, regardless of environment, regardless of even how I might feel, I can do this. I can do whatever I'm asking myself to do, or whatever my teammates are asking myself to do, which is a very, very powerful quality, and one that I'm very, very grateful for.
It's interesting. The two you bring up are confidence and then humility, and almost how they can be opposites, but also play off of each other so well. I just find that really intriguing. I would love to know, do you think there's a certain type of, we can just call it training or system of training, that the SEALs do that you just think would be so invaluable for any civilian, that has just helped you tremendously in life?
Well, the one thing I would say that about all spec operators, and even even military folks who go through some very intense training, is that in those types of environments, what's happening is you're being thrown into deep challenge, uncertainty, and stress, and you're being asked to make it through. And so that's the conduct of that act alone is invaluable training for any human being, because you can translate that, you can map that onto almost any environment. It's funny, I live in a neighborhood, and I have 3 other SEALs in my neighborhood, right? One across the street, one down the road to the right, one down the road to the left. And obviously it's great having the neighborhood, awesome dudes. But I remember my wife once saying to me, she's like, I'm so glad these guys are around, because if you were gone and anything happened, I know that I could go to them, any one of them, and they'd act just like you act. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, they'd immediately calm down, they'd figure out the problem, and start working the problem. And I think that's what this type of training does, is it allows you to, in the deepest moments of stress, challenge, and uncertainty, calm yourself and begin working the problem. And working the problem might be really tiny steps, or it might be leaps, whatever that is. But it's that ability to take that action, however small or however large. And I think that is translatable to every human being. So the question you ask, I mean, I don't know if you could take one thing out of SEAL training and have every civilian do it, because some people wouldn't be able to carry boats on their heads. Some people would freeze in the cold water. I think it's a combination of things, but I think the good news is that we all, as human beings, go through stress, challenge, uncertainty. I mean, look at 2020. I mean, 2020 was all of our own Buds. I mean, the only difference between SEAL training in 2020 was that none of us volunteered to be there, and none of us had a bell to ring to quit, right? We were all stuck there, right? So we were all forced to really look ourselves in the mirror and press through. And it's going to be, and anybody who takes the time to kind of look back and autopsy that, and autopsy their behavior, and where they did things great, where they did things that were not so great, that is lessons. Those are lessons that can be applied. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm really happy that the Attributes is coming out when it is, because the book was almost written, almost complete by the time we all went into lockdown. So I had no clue that this would happen. But what I realized as I was kind of editing and stuff, I was like, man, this is actually, 2020 was a great environment, great laboratory inside of which all of us had our attributes tested, and all of us can begin to see where we're high on some and maybe a little bit deficient on others, and where we might want to work on things. So I think that's a really interesting process that all of us can take away from.
Oh, absolutely. You want to talk about 2020? I mean, you were thrown in the arena, and if you're willing to do that self-discovery of where you excelled, where you were flawed, it was an unbelievable time. So I love how you bring that up. And one of the reasons the Attributes really resonate with me, the book, is just because you dive into the neuroscience as well. And I think that's so important, so key. Because one of the things I'm always trying to work on is remaining calm in hostile environments, whether it be during investments, whether it be during meetings, anything like that. So when you actually understand how the brain works, which is you did such a great job explaining, it's always so much more helpful. I would love, though, to understand how you came across and even develop these 25 attributes. So this is probably going to start with a high level overview of what the new book, The Attributes, is, and then how you distilled them down to 25 attributes.
Yeah, well, it all started when I was still in the SEAL teams, and I was actually running assessment, selection, and training for one of our very specialized commands. And in this particular command, what was happening was that we take experienced spec operators and then put them through our process. It was about a 9-month process, and that would be whether or not they made it through would decide whether or not they could, they were able to serve at the unit. And so we were getting very experienced SEALs, and we were still getting about a 50% attrition rate. So 50% of these really experienced guys were not making it through our program, and we were really at a loss on how to effectively articulate why. The best we had was, well, this guy didn't cut it. He wasn't good enough at CQB, which is close quarter combat or close quarter battle. He wasn't a good enough skydiver or whatever. And those reasons weren't landing well with us, because we knew it was kind of like, well, that's not the real deep reason. They weren't landing well with our leadership, because our leadership was like, hey, you got to do better than that, because we had all these guys are coming, and now we have to send them away. And they certainly weren't landing well with the actual candidate, because these were guys who were coming at the peak of their confidence. Like, hey, I got selected to come to this selection process, and now you're telling me that I don't have what it takes. And so I took over training, and I was asked by my CO to kind of take a look at trying to articulate this a little better. And that's when I really had to start thinking about the difference between skills and attributes. So just to break it down for your audience, I mean, skills and attributes, they get conflated all the time, but they're inherently different. Skills are not inherent to our nature, right? We're not born with the ability to ride a bike or drive a car or shoot a gun in the military sense, right? We learn those, we can be taught them, and we can even sit down in a classroom and be taught them. I can teach you how to shoot, right? That's a skill. They direct our behavior in known environments, right? Here's how and when to drive a car. Here's how and when to ride a bike. Here's how and when to shoot a gun. And therefore, because they're so visible, and because they can be broken down and taught in steps, they're very easy to see, assess, and measure, right? You can see how well we do any one of those things. This is why most teams are guilty of focusing mostly on skills, because you can see how well someone's sales numbers are, or how well someone is how good of a graphic designer. Those are very visible things. What skills don't tell us, however, is how we show up in stress, challenge, and uncertainty when the environment goes south and sideways and nothing makes sense, right? Everything goes to hell. That's where attributes come in. Attributes are inherent to our nature, right? All of us are born with some levels of resilience, adaptability, situational awareness, even discipline to a degree, because you can see some of that in small kids. They inform rather than direct our behavior. So for example, my levels of adaptability and resilience will inform the way I show up when I'm learning how to ride a bike and I'm falling off a dozen times. How am I showing up during that process? Because they're hidden, though, because they're in the background, kind of like an app, kind of like the backgrounds programming on an app on an iPhone. They are very hard to assess, measure, and test. They're hard to see. And they're most visible and visceral, again, when you're in challenge, uncertainty, and stress, which is exactly why I felt like, man, I was in a perfect laboratory to be able to see this stuff. Because SEAL training, whether it's BUDS, or whether it was the training I was running, is all about throwing people into deep challenge and uncertainty and stress. And so the attributes start to show up. And if you start thinking about attributes in terms of, this is what's driving my behavior, okay? Once I'm behaving, that might be a skill, but this is driving my behavior. Then you start to understand how someone shows up. And we realized that we needed to look at our training program and say, okay, instead of judging someone on how good of a shot they are, for example, or how fast they run, or how well they skydive, we need to figure out what are the attributes we're looking for. Okay, and so we set out to kind of make a list, and we got together small groups and put together a list, and we came up with about 36 that we were looking for. And it changed the game for us in terms of being able to articulate why certain guys were making it and why certain guys weren't making it. It also began to help us spot the dark horses. So someone who showed up and they didn't necessarily have the skills, right? And that guy's a really bad shot, but he has all the attributes we're looking for. So we can always teach him how to shoot. That's easy. You know, when it came to writing the book, I realized I didn't want to write a book about SEALs, and I didn't want to write a book that wasn't relatable. I wanted to write a book that was about the reader. So I had to ask myself, okay, when it comes to just human behavior, when it comes to our own performance in the world, what are the attributes out of this? I used the list of the 36 first, and I whittled it down and kind of changed it a little bit. But what are the attributes that are most important and kind of the most show up the most when it comes to just performing every day? And that's how I kind of whittled it down to the 25 that are in the book, and then of course put it into categories. So what are the ones that make up grit? What are the ones that make up mental acuity? What are the ones that make up drive? And then leadership and team ability. So so that was really the impetus and the process, and it was really fun because, again, once you start actually writing and actually doing the work, the ideas keep on coming, which was also fun.
Yeah, the fun thing with writing is you realize how little you actually know of the things you've been trying to say.
That's right.
So I'm actually curious about that. Believe me, we're going to dive a lot of the attributes, but as you're uncovering this, is there things you learn even more about yourself while writing this book?
Oh, without a doubt, because I never had thought about necessarily how the attributes applied to me, because I was always running it for others. I was running this training program, so really sitting down and doing it, I had to start saying, okay, well, how does this apply to me, and how can I best define it? This is a perfect example is competitiveness. Competitiveness was previously one of the primary attributes. As you see in the book, I moved it to what I call the others, these attributes that, because I realized competitiveness, you can be non-competitive and be very, very successful. It's not a requirement, which means both competitiveness and non-competitiveness, high levels of each are good, right? Versus, say, adaptability. I think we can all argue pretty effectively that if you're low on adaptability, you're probably not going to be very successful. You're not going to perform optimally. You have to be, the higher you are, the more adaptable you are, the better. But that's not the case with competitiveness. So it allowed me to do some exploration on how the attributes felt for me, and of course looking at the guys I had worked with, and then also just people I've worked with since getting out of the Navy, and looking at business teams and things like that. So yeah, I would, anybody who's interested in writing, my first piece of advice would be start writing, because as soon as, like you said, as soon as you start writing, you get what you're thinking down on page, and that clears your head, and suddenly new ideas pop up, and you just like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that, and it's just a really cool process.
I love thinking through the stress, challenge, and uncertainty. And I know in the book you talk about dormant attributes that come out during these times. And I would love for you to elaborate on this, because I think this is one of the really interesting insights that the attributes provided.
Yeah, well, so the dormant attributes are basically attributes that you have, and maybe even have high levels of, but you never knew you had, because you've never been put or thrown into an environment that's teased that attribute out. So an example could be that someone could think of themselves as an impatient person, and then that person has kids, okay, and in the child rearing process, they realize, oh, wait a second, I'm actually a pretty patient person, right? Patience comes out, right? But I would say this, I mean, for anybody who's interested in their dormant attributes, any story in your life that you can think of or recall that can end with the sentence, I never knew I had it in me, is an example of a dormant attribute coming to the fore that you didn't know you had. And again, that usually happens in challenge, uncertainty, and stress, when we get uncomfortable and things don't make sense, and we don't have any skills to apply. That's really when those things start showing up.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I have 2 kids under the age of 2.5. So those patients are being tested at all times right now for me. I didn't know I had some of these skills in me.
By the way, your patients will be tested even more when they become teenagers. Just
I know.
A little preview.
Very much looking forward to that. One of the things I love you talking about, and you mentioned this a minute ago, is around those dark horses. And I think a lot of the people, myself in particular, we're always looking for that undiscovered talent and where we can find it. Do you have a specific concrete example around how someone maybe didn't have the right skills, but due to the attributes, you could uncover one of these dark horses?
Well, I'll give you kind of an example that's probably a conglomerate of a bunch of different things I've learned and people I've talked to. Because again, and in the chapter I have a chapter called the Dream Team Paradox. This is the paradox of dream teams. People put together dream teams usually based only on skills.
Mhm.
And so what happens is you have all the best people, right? And things are going great while things are going great. And then as soon as something bad happens, as soon as a curveball is thrown, suddenly people start to break down because the skills don't apply. So you realize, oh shoot, that person is not adaptable at all, that person is not humble at all, that person has no empathy, right? So these things start to break down and becomes toxic. I would say that the attribute that's sometimes difficult to see but fun when it shows up is humor, because sometimes you'll be hanging with people and you're like, oh, they're just normal, and then something bad will happen, and that the one person will pipe up with something like hilarious and like make you all laugh. You're like, oh my god, that person's really funny. I mean, so humor is one that sometimes shows up without people seeing. I think the grit ones, and so the grit attributes are courage, perseverance, adaptability, and resilience. Those are very, very difficult to see unless you are in environments that actually ask for grit. So that becomes a challenging thing for any hiring process or recruitment process, because how do we put someone through, how do we test this stuff with, while still staying staying legal, I guess, because throwing a bunch of accountants into the surf zone is probably not a good idea, right? Nor would it necessarily tell you how good they are at accounting. So I think that some of those dormant attributes, again, tough to say because it becomes subjective in terms of which ones you see. I mean, SEAL training is an easy one because it's an environment that whether you see it beforehand or not, you're going to see someone's level of grit. You're going to see someone's level of drive. When I was running training when I was training or running close quarter combat training, which is this concept, this idea for your audience of just going into buildings and clearing out rooms. Very dynamic process, very fast. It's kind of like when you do it right, it's kind of like a dance. I mean, it's a really masterful thing. I was blown away as to how visible the mental acuity attributes became in that environment. In fact, that was probably the premier environment for us to see mental acuity attributes. So the environment will tell you oftentimes which attributes are going to come to the fore or which attributes will be leaned on or required more.
You mentioned clearing a building there. It's almost like an elegant dance. I would love to know, how many practice reps does it seem to take to get to that level of skill?
Yeah. Well, so the dance is a mix between skills and attributes. Talent, I think, is a mix. It's a dynamic kind of synchronization between skills and attributes. That's what talent, I think, really is. Because again, you look at the best athletes, even athletes, which athletics are highly, highly, highly skills based. Because you need to know, because you have rules and boundaries and you can practice skills, right? But we all know that the top athletes in the world, they're not that way because of just skills. I mean, a lot of people can probably throw a football the same way Tom Brady can throw a football. But there's a lot more to Tom Brady, on that football field than just throwing the football. There's adaptability, there's situational awareness, there's patience, there's all the team ability ones. So I think the idea of, so to get back to your question, I mean, going through clearing a house, you can see any type of dance like that is a exercise in making sure you have the skills. Okay, I've trained on the range enough so that I can point my rifle and shoot and hit the target where I need to hit it. So I have that skill. But then it's a matter of just reps, and just being in that environment, and you begin to practice the dance, because no CQC run is ever going to be the same, right? It's always going to be different. All right. So you understand the skills in terms of, okay, I know in this situation I can do this and this and this, and then it's just a matter of getting comfortable applying things as the environment change. And of course, you add into that the teamwork. I mean, there's an enormous level of trust, and the guys going in with you, what they can do, their capabilities. So that's how it begins to mesh when it meshes really perfectly, which is really how any team should be.
Rich, you mentioned just even being willing to go into those environments, and that makes me think a lot about fear. And I'm sure a lot of people, Rich, Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL, probably doesn't experience fear. And I know from the book, you talk about courage, and that's not necessarily the case. I would love for you to dive into this because I think it's a really interesting perspective. A lot of people probably wouldn't think about around, especially someone like yourself, a former Navy SEAL.
Well, yeah, it's a invalid assumption because every human being experiences fear. Fear is actually a requirement to survive the human experience. I was advised as a young officer to beware the fearless leader because he'll likely get you killed. Do not follow someone who's fearless because that means they're not listening to the cues that are telling them to slow down or think twice or take a step in a different direction, right? So but fear ultimately breaks down to the combination of two things. It's the combination of anxiety plus uncertainty, right? So you can have one or the other and not have fear show up. We can be anxious about a presentation we're going to give next week in front of our boss. We know when it's going to be. We know kind of how it's going to go because we know the presentation. It's not like we don't know it, right? So we're just anxious. So there's no fear. You can be uncertain without being anxious. Okay, that's every kid on Christmas Eve. Okay, so and so fear it doesn't exist there. When you begin to combine anxiety with uncertainty, that's when fear begins to show up. And fear is an interesting thing because it's a kind of an autonomic response, right? It starts to bubble up in our amygdala, and our brain begins to say, "Okay, what am I going to do here? I'm left with two choices, right? Either fight or flight." Some people think there's the freeze choice is there, but really what the freeze choice is neurologically is our kind of oscillation in trying to decide whether or not to fight or flight. If we go either direction, right? If we either choose to fight, and fight again is not put up your dukes and punch people. It's step into the fear. It's move into the fear. And then flight is to retreat from the fear. If we decide to go either direction, a unique circuit is tripped in the brain. Okay, so it's a separate circuit for flight than it is for fight. If you decide to step in, if you decide to fight, a circuit is flipped, and that's really kind of the courage circuit, right? A switch is flipped in your brain, and you're immediately rewarded with dopamine. Okay, now we all know what dopamine is. It's been all over for a while, but the feel good chemical tells our body, tells our system, hey, this feels good, keep doing it. Okay, very powerful chemical. We're rewarded with that dopamine every time we step into our fear. So this is a common misconception, is that dopamine only comes at the completion of a goal, right? No, it comes every time we step into fear. Okay, so I think when it comes to courage, we all have kind of a set point in our autonomic system as to when we're going to kind of tip into that fear response. If the mean is like boiling point, right, 212, then we all know some people who boil over at like 190. They get afraid faster than normal. They get freaked out faster than normal. But there are other people who boil. It takes a while for them to boil over. Like I don't know if the Alex Honnold documentary, Free Soul. That guy, he's probably set at like 230, right? It takes a while for him to boil over. Wherever you land on that is probably a level of it starts to speak to your level of courage as an attribute. But just know this is that, and I think it's important for people. It is a conscious choice, right? We can consciously decide to continually step into our fear, to move in, and we'll get a reward for doing so. Now, caveat is that sometimes the better answer is to retreat. Stepping into our fear is not always the right answer, right? Because fighting a bear will get you killed. So, but again, we're not in the position where we're fighting a lot of bears. So giving that presentation that you don't want to give, or that public speech that you don't want to give, taking on that project that you might have been hesitant to, starting that conversation with the person that you have a crush on. Those are all ways that people can actually step into their fear. And they will get a dopamine hit, and it's a way to practice it. And so I think for spec operators, the advantage we have is we're just asked to do it so often. There are guys in the SEAL teams who don't like scuba diving. They hate to be underwater. They do it every day. There are guys like me who don't really like heights, so skydiving was an issue. There are guys. I mean, the special operations community, the police community, the firefighting community, the first responder community, all these people who serve in stressful situations and under duress, all these people are regular people who have decided actively to continually step into their fear. And if you do that often enough, it becomes fairly habitual, which I wouldn't say makes it easier, but it certainly makes it more. It certainly makes you more able to do it, to especially take that first step.
Rich, that was awesome. That was like a master class in terms of deconstructing how you work, how the brain actually operates, and then applicable lessons there for everyone. So that was awesome. I couldn't have asked for anything better there. I have to go on a side comment here for a second. You bring up Alex Honnold. I listened to a great conversation the other day with Dr. Michael Gervais, the performance specialist, and Jimmy Chin, the one who put together the free solo documentary. And at the very end of it, he had a really interesting thing. And this is something I want to talk about with you around Alex's visualization process. So I would love to know about if you use visualization at all. And he was talking about Alex in preparation for free soloing. He actually visualizes. He'll spend all day just sitting there thinking about through every possible climb, but he thinks about falling and understanding if he messes up, what his possible escape routes are, which I just thought was a really interesting perspective. So long-winded way of asking, do you use or have you used visualization at all?
Oh yes. In fact, we actually started to study it a little bit because I've always been fascinated with visualization, and even when we were in the teams, and actually when I was in the same job as a training officer, we were putting together some procedures and methods to help guys perform better, faster, and stronger. And visualization became one of those things we really looked into. When you look into the psychology of visualization, the brain, when you kind of actively visualize, and when I say actively visualize, you close your eyes and you can see yourself in a situation. You can feel, like Alex's case, he can feel the rocks on his hands. Actively visualize that way. Your brain begins to not be able to tell the difference between the reality and what you're visualizing. In other words, it's going to start making the same chemicals that it would if you were in that situation already. So what does that tell us? That tells us if you are able to actively visualize training something, whether it be climbing or a skill. And I was told by an example of this with a field goal kicker. One of the docs I was working with said he had had a football field goal kicker come in, and this field goal kicker was spending about 85-90% of the time on the field practicing kicking, right? And he said, okay, we're going to switch that. We're going to we're going to take your physical training down to about 50%, and we're going to spend the rest of the 50% just visualizing yourself kicking, right? The advantage of visualizing is you can actually visualize perfectly. Okay, you can actually visualize yourself doing the act perfectly. That becomes training, and you're actually creating myelin around those neural circuits in that process. You're learning through visualization. So absolutely, visualization is huge, and the key is to try to do it in an area where you can actually get really in depth in it. You want to be able to just feel, hear, smell everything around it, and it'll begin to elicit those chemicals. So I've used it all the time. I've used it for training, and I've also used it for relaxation as well, and kind of coming, and recovery, because you can use it for that as well.
Yeah, it's something I used a lot in my athletic career. And then even now, I mean, preparing for a meeting, anything like that, even in this conversation, I find myself really trying to feel every single thing I'd feel during these moments. So that's something, I agree with you. I would love if people develop that even more. Rich, I can't help but think that you just seem to me to be a very, very deep thinker. And even the book, and then just our conversation, just how many different things and even just your ability to cross-pollinate ideas amongst different fields, learnings, everything like that. I'm wondering, how much time do you spend just with this introspective, deep thinking process?
Yeah, quite a bit. I really enjoy, and I believe that introspection is one of the most necessary factors, especially in self-development, self-improvement, to kind of think about yourself and think about things. It's interesting. I had thought about this when someone else had asked me a while ago, and I realized I kind of walked this back when I was a kid. I grew up in the 80s, right? And I had, 3 other siblings, and I remember we'd go on vacations, but we'd always drive places. So we drive everywhere around the country, and we didn't have Walkmans, and we didn't have iPhones, and all I did for hours and hours and hours was stare out the window of the car, and I'd imagine. And I recognized how powerful that activity was for me as an adult, because I can sit on an airplane now and I can just look out the window. I don't need to watch a movie. I sometimes do, but I don't need to, right? And sometimes I deliberately take off the headphones and I just think. Um, I think it's really important for all of us to understand the power of introspection and to let ourselves be in our own heads, because we're so inundated with so many ways we can escape, that it's almost habitual that we don't uh, kind of think. We don't get into our heads. We're sitting at the airport and we're waiting for our flight, and it's 10 minutes before we board. We whip out our iPhone and start doing a game there, right? We listen to some music. We listen to a podcast, whatever it is. We've developed a habit of escaping and entertaining ourselves because it's become so easy. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing that once in a while, but we just have to understand that when we do that, we're not allowing our brains to be kind of inside, we're not allowing ourselves to be inside our head. And as soon as we start getting inside our head, we can start thinking about ideas. I mean, I'll listen to a podcast, for example, and I'll hear someone say something, or the host and the guest will say something. And I'm like, man, that's really good. I'll shut off the podcast and I'll think about it for like 10 minutes, because I want to take that time. I want to take that time to process how I'm thinking about it, how I feel about it, what my thoughts are. And that's become kind of routine. We have to find our moments. I would tell you one of the places that I love the most doing it is running. I'll go for jogs on trails around here where I live in Virginia, and I have no headphones. I don't time myself. I don't pace myself. I'm by myself, and I'll just run. And that combination of just the physical activity and just thinking, man, I come up with I just at one point I had to start bringing I bought a little microphone or a recording device, because I'd come up with so many ideas that I'd forget them by the time I finished the run. So I'd record them while I was running, which was always hilarious to listen back on, because you're breathing hard. But it's great thinking time for me. And so I would encourage everybody to try to have times in their days to just think, be inside their head. And it doesn't have to be a lot of time. It could be literally you're waiting, at the pharmacy for your turn to go. Try not to look at your phone. Just think, look around, observe, be inside your head. And I think that's really valuable.
You put one of the puzzle pieces together for me just now. The last week and a half has been one of those weeks where I've just had to shut off a lot of things. And even when I'm working out, no music, just silence. It's like I just needed to think. And then you just mentioned about running without headphones. I live in South Florida. I usually spend a lot of time, a nice long swim, completely clear my head, no headphones. A little bit colder, so I'm like, I don't want to get in the water. And now I'm realizing that I hadn't had enough of those swims built in right now with all that free time. One thing I've discovered a lot during this self-reflection, introspection period is a lot of times the best answers come from the best questions. I know, kind of throwing you on the spot here. Are there any questions that you've gone to that you think are just very helpful in helping clear your mind or answer some questions for you?
Well, yeah, and actually, it's a great segue, because one of the things I talk about in the book is this idea that neurologically we're designed to answer questions. That's what our brains do. Our brains are constantly asking questions about the environment to understand the environment. Oftentimes, it's being done unconsciously. However, if we consciously take charge of that and ask ourselves any question, our forebrain is immediately going to come up with answers. Okay. The problem is most of us do this without thinking, and we do it the wrong way. We say things like, why am I so bad at this? Or why does this always happen to me? As soon as you lodge that question into your brain's going to come up with answers. I do this experiment with classes I teach sometimes, where I say, okay, I'm going to give you 30 seconds and I'm going to ask you this question. How could you double your income in the next 6 months? Okay. You have 30 seconds, write down anything that pops into your head. Okay. And I give the group 30 seconds to do it. And I said, it doesn't matter how ridiculous, just write down anything that pops in your head. Okay, after about 30 seconds, pretty much everybody will have at least 3, 4, 5 answers written down. And what I tell them is that, hey, this is not an example of that question. It's not an example. I don't even care what the answers are. This is an example of when you put any question to your brain begins to answer it. All right, so you can take charge of that by reframing your questions and saying, hey, how can I get better at this? What are some of the things I've learned? Kind of to get to the original crux of your question, because people ask me all the time, hey, can you give me a list of great questions? Well, the questions are largely subjective. However, the question I ask myself when I don't know what to ask myself is, what's the better question right now? All right. And I just let my brain answer that and I come up with questions. Okay. If you're in deep challenge, uncertainty, and stress, and you don't, and the environment doesn't make sense, and you just don't know really what's going on or how to get through, the question I always ask myself is, what can I control right now? And this is something that the Spec Ops guys do, and the SEALs, sometimes SEALs will call it, just control your 3-foot world. And it's about understanding, hey, out of all of this, what can I control right now? That answer might be, I can only control the step I'm taking, and I'll take one step. But guess what? After you take that step, you ask again, and that's how you step through challenge, uncertainty, and stress. You begin to ask yourself, what can I control? You move to that, and then you ask it again, and then you move to that, and you ask it again. This is kind of like eating the elephant one bite at a time, or chunking your environment. But it's very, very powerful because you're activating the neurology that already exists in your brain in a positive, proactive way. And by the way, by doing that, every time you're deciding what to control, stepping towards it, you're also, especially in challenge, uncertainty, and stress, you're probably triggering that courage circuit. So you're getting a dopamine hit. So you're getting rewarded for it, and you're stepping through. And so this is the difference between, and I talk about it in the book as well, peak performance and optimal performance. Right? I was never really interested in peak performance, although it's great. Okay, but I felt like we Spec Ops guys were mostly optimal performance. So peak is it's an apex from which you can only come down, and has to be planned for and prepared for and scheduled. The athlete prepares for his or her entire week so that they may peak for the moment, when they're competing, right? That's not real life. Real life is actually optimal performance. Optimal performance is, how can I do the very best I can in the moment with what I got, whatever that looks like. Okay. Sometimes that might look like peak. It might look like flow states and everything's clicking and it feels awesome. A lot of times it might look like, I'm just taking one step at a time. That's all I got. That's all I can do. Oh, enter COVID, right? All of us, we woke up, the morning of quarantine. Very few of us had skills which we could apply to this. So we were leaning on our attributes, and we were saying to ourselves, hey, what can I do right now? What can I control? Well, I'll kind of do this and I'll do that. And I would imagine very few of us could describe our performance during 2020 as peak. Okay, most of us were optimally performing. Again, nothing wrong with peak. When you can plan to peak, when you can peak, do it, right? But just know that reality and life requires optimal performance. Optimal performance is much more responsible, and it's much more I guess also healthy, right? Because we begin to not beat ourselves up for not kind of being the best or doing the best, right? We're doing what we can do in the moment. We're understanding the modulation that's required for life.
This is great. I ask a question looking for a tactic, and you just drop wisdom, which is, of course, the only thing we need in this world. You bring up a really interesting thing. You've already brought up a lot of great points. I think that would help with this, but around not beating yourself up. I know it's coming like type A personality, a lot of high performers. The second that we're not redlining, it's all of a sudden we start beating ourselves up. Anything that you've uncovered that's been helpful for you when those times pop up?
Well, it's really this idea of, hey, what can I do in the moment, and just do that. And so I kind of remember when I was in SEAL training, I was freezing in the surf zone. They do surf torture out there. There was nothing peak about my performance. I was just doing the best I could, which was not to quit, right? Which is to stay here until they tell me to do something else. Okay. But regular life, involves this. I mean, look at the cancer. Look at someone who's going through cancer treatment. I mean, any cancer patient will tell you, hey, usually on the days of chemo, hey, during that chemotherapy, I was just making it through the next minute or the next hour or the next day. That's what I was doing. I was just stepping through. And so I think if we accept ourselves, I mean, the key to not beating ourselves up is accepting that we're human, because none of us are from Krypton. Okay, so we all have down moments, we all have up moments, and what we need to understand is, as long as in our down moments we're still okay, and I say progressing, but even progressing, even doing the right thing, doing the best you can, might not even be progressing. It might be resting. It might be just staying put for a while, right? And that's important too. So as long as you're doing the right thing by yourself, for yourself, and for your team, it can be gritty, it can be muddy, it can be dirty, it can be uncomfortable, but that's what it is, And don't beat yourself up, because it's highly unrealistic to try to be peak all the time. And look, and I don't do ultra runs, right? But those people who do long ultra runs would tell you, if I were to ask them, hey, are you at peak for your whole ultra run? They're like, Hell no, right? They're not peak the whole time. They're modulating. It's a modulation that goes on. Such is life. Okay, we modulate ourselves so that we move through life, and in every moment we're saying, okay, in this moment, what's the best setting right now? And then that will inform us as to when we have to run up to 10 and then be down at 2. And I think that's, if we're doing that, there's no reason why we should beat ourselves up.
Yeah, such a great point. Life works in oscillation. You need that stress. You're gonna need that rest. You're gonna need that recovery. That's such a great point. I just love how many different rabbit holes almost I could go down with you. And clearly, you're very well read. I'm just wondering, are there certain books or even other things you've come across throughout all the years that you just thought, wow, this has a lot of wisdom packed in this. I might revisit this again.
Yeah, well, I looked at the list of books you have on your website, by the way, is phenomenal. I've read a lot of those. Those are all great books. Also try to read books that are a little bit outside of maybe what I might be thinking about, because I think I've been told that one of the sparks of creativity is the ability to kind of merge two concepts that are not the same, right? So in other words, if you read a book on underwater basket weaving, and and one of those concepts you get from your underwater basket weaving, you suddenly can relate to how I'm planning this next mission. That's creativity, right? So the diversification of what we read, I think, is important, and I try to be a little bit diversified. Admittedly, I don't read a lot of fiction, but I should. I don't think people should focus on fiction, because there should be a balance there, and sometimes fiction can move a little bit more into the escape category. But I think diversifying what you read. I think one of the best recent books I reread was *Sapiens* by Harari, because I think it's just such a really great. I mean, it's long, but it's a really great explanation of who we are as humans, and the fact that we are humans. And I think for me, it's always boiling down to, I am interested in helping people, well, doing this myself too, but how can we continually seek our edges and explore our potential and move to the next edge and do it again and do it again. That's how we evolve. That's how we become. That's how we've gone from cave dwellers to space explorers. Is that people have always looked at what the edge is, moved towards it, and then once they got there, looked to the next edge. And I think that that the more we can do that, well, our ability to do that first rests on our ability to recognize that we're human first, and understand humanness and understanding our own unique engines that we bring to the game. And then once we start understanding our engines, we say, okay, now what are those things I can slap on that engine to start exploring my edges and going to the next one and going to the next one. It's kind of like, hey, go to the horizon and then you'll see the next horizon, and that's what fascinates me. And so it starts with being human. So Harari's book really kind of helps me with that, but I would say that's the most recent one.
Yeah, uncovering the core of what's at you is great. If you're looking for an interesting read on creativity, you mentioned that recommended book reading list. I need to update that because there's been some over the past, I don't think I've added to that in the last 6 months, some really good ones around creativity. There's this small book called Chase, Chance, and Creativity. If you haven't read it, I'll send this afterwards, but start around page 100, and it dives into a lot of around what you'd be really interested with the creativity. So that might be one that you're really interested in. Yeah. You talk about running towards our edges. And I know a friend of yours, Josh Waitskin, former chess prodigy, master learner, his book, The Art of Learning, is just fantastic. And he's got this concept, being at peace in the chaos. And you brought up that quote earlier around the enemy never be brave enough or stupid enough to follow us into the water. And I would just love to know, seeking out those edges for yourself, are there things you do now that you're outside the military to put yourself in more chaotic or hostile environments intentionally?
Oh yeah. I mean, writing a book is one.
Yeah.
When I got out of the military, and I immediately went to work for a leadership institute, where we were in front of people, we were giving speeches and also teaching classes. Well, I don't know if this might come as a surprise, but I didn't give a lot of speeches when I was a Navy SEAL, and I didn't teach a lot of classes. As a Navy SEAL, you're not in front of people a lot, right? So we're being required to speak. So that was way outside my comfort zone. I did not like the idea of doing it. And so I said to myself very deliberately, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to step into this to see if I can get better at it and become good at it, which I did. Writing a book, I love writing, but writing a book is a big undertaking, and so that was another way I stepped into that kind of uncomfortable zone. And of course, promoting the book. I mean, again, everything about promotion is typically antithetical to kind of how I spent the last 20 plus years. Is you don't promote yourself, right? So having to think differently and say, okay, how do I start talking about this and promoting this in a way that it gets out to people and helps people? That's different than, it's outside my comfort zone, very admittedly. So I'm constantly looking for those edges, and I'm gauging it on, of course, where I am in life. I'm not going to be bungee jumping anytime soon. But what those edges are, and how I can look at edges I can go and conquer that are proactive, and empowering and beneficial to my life right now, my family, and where I want to go in the future. So I think that's a really important exercise for people to continuously do. And I get it if you're at the position where it's like, hey, listen, I'm comfortable, I'm good, that's fine too. But I do think the key to growth is this idea of stretching the muscle. I mean, we go to the gym, we lift weights. What are we doing? We're ripping the muscle, right? We're ripping the muscle so that when we sleep, the muscles can grow, repair and grow bigger. Okay, the same thing with growth in our lives. We have to go out and find ways to rip the muscle. That means getting uncomfortable. It means maybe having a little bit of pain and certainly anxiety and maybe and fear as well. But all you're doing is ripping the muscle. That's what you're doing. And then if you're doing it the right way, it'll repair and you'll come out of it having grown, which I think is cool.
Yeah, I don't know what life would be without feeling that fear, that pain, that loss, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
You brought this up earlier. I mean, adaptability, evolution. I mean, it was one of the fundamental laws of human nature. So if we're not evolving, not adapting, I don't know what we are doing. You mentioned,
I'll add one thing, because I say this too. Our life is a sine wave, right? That's what, if we were to plot our life, the ups and downs, it's a sine wave. It's ups and downs. And the downs are as important as the ups, right? That's part of the spice of life. And I say, anybody who loves roller coasters, I mean, how many of you would like to get on a roller coaster that only went up?
Yeah.
Okay? It would be no fun, right? I mean, the whole thing about a roller coaster is the loops and the turns and the ups and downs, right? So that such is life, and we need to, as best we can, because there are some downs that are no kidding downs, right? And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, so I'm not saying that downs aren't bad, but to the extent possible, if we can find the value in the downs, that will help us.
Yeah, a lot of times those deepest truths come from those darkest moments.
Yeah,
you mentioned running towards those edges, and for you getting out there promoting the book. I love supporting people who I find tremendous value and real truth in their work. And your book, The Attributes, is one of them. The lessons I've learned from you, very fundamental in terms of shaping how I think and how I go about life. So I would love to know, of course, we're going to have the attributes linked up everywhere listeners can get it. Anything you want to leave listeners with about the book?
Well, I will say, if you go to the website, one of the things we did do, and I'm kind of proud of this, is that we created an assessment tool that you can find on the website. So once you read the book, you'll read about the attributes, and then you can go to the website and take an assessment to see where you stand, where you fall on the grit attributes, the mental acuity attributes, and the drive attributes. And so what we did was we kind of put together questions. We got data from about 1,000 people around the world. And so when you get your results will be as compared to 1,000 people, right? So in adaptability, you might be out of a 10, you might be a level 7 as compared to 1,000 people. So it's a good snapshot on where you fall, or where we might kind of settle in some of these attributes, and give you an idea as to which ones you're a little bit higher on and which ones you might be lower on. So definitely encourage people to do that, because again, my goal is to have people try to figure out their own engine and figure out their own palette, so that they can then choose whatever pathway they want to choose and succeed, and do it optimally, right? Knowing that success is going to come with it some hardship, some strife, some discomfort, but that's okay, because that's all part of the journey. So yeah, theattributes.com has all that stuff. And yeah, I would just encourage people to enjoy it and absorb it, and go find their edges.
Yeah, find their edges, knowing yourself, understanding yourself. Someone's one of the underlying themes of this entire conversation. Final thing before we wrap up here, I would love to know, if you were to sit down for an evening having a conversation like this, anyone dead or alive, just not a family member, who would you love to spend the evening having a conversation with?
Yeah, there are so many, but the person that immediately pops to mind is Carl Sagan, because that guy.
I had his wife on, Anne
Oh, did
Durant.
you?
Yeah, I love
Wow.
Carl Sagan. Yeah.
Yeah, man, I listened to him. When I was a kid, I remember watching Cosmos, and I just astronomy is fascinating to me, and yeah, Carl Sagan is one of those guys who I could listen to all day long.
Speaking of people we could listen to or have a conversation with all day long, Rich, you're one of those people. The book, The Attributes, is out now. I cannot thank you enough for joining us on What Got You There.
Well, thanks for having me, Sean. Real pleasure and honor to be here. So thank you.
Sean Delaney.